one of the beautiful things about Jay's work was he selflessly wanted the concept of blue mind, the groundswell. He wanted it just to be common knowledge that we have an emotional connection to water. That was his goal. There wasn't an economic driver for him. That's what it was. It was not copywriting. It wasn't like that. He just wanted more and more, it to just be common words. And, but I think you're right. I think when you get something like a concept like sustainability come to the forefront, it's, how you interpret it. And certainly there's a lot of room we can go, but the word and what it represents has moved the needle, which is really, I think is a really important thing.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to another interview episode of Care More, Be Better. I have some news to share with all of you today, and then we're going to dig into the topic of sustainability education with yet another inspiring professor from Prescott College. Okay, it's a bit of story time here. This winter, I met Dr. Wallace J. Nichols after having been introduced by a former guest on this show, the co-founder of Pioneers, Nina Simons. These two incredibly talented and dedicated individuals both got me thinking about my personal journey and about what I wanted from the rest of my work life. Nina Simons' approach to relationship and relational leadership, and her important work that was at the nexus of nature, culture, and sacred knowledge made me long to get back into the world of anthropological research. I wanted to throw caution to the wind and abandon my career for something even more purposeful. Then, when I got to know Dr. Wallace J. Nichols, or rather simply Jay, I was awed by his steadfast pursuit of everything that related to water. From his work as a marine biologist with sea turtles to his environmental stewardship and his blue mind way of thinking with his book. I witnessed in him someone who pursued the life dream that he had from the age of 6. His blue mind perspective resonated with me so deeply that I found myself reflecting back on every life decision that I had made, each time that I had made a step towards security and away from what I believed to be my true path. You see, I'm really just a little hippie kid at heart. I'm the one that picks up the trash in the street, on the trail, or on the beach every time I see it. I'm the one that rehomes unwanted animals and rescues the runts. I'm the one who spends an afternoon cupping handfuls of water and pollywogs, saving them from drying puddles so that they don't bake in the sun. I'm the same idealist, animal, and nature lover that I've always been, and the budding scientist that I was as a kid. So it's with that fascination with who we are, how we live, and our effect on the world that really got me to start this podcast in the first place. If you've listened to my last few episodes, you likely already know that Jay is no longer with us. He sadly passed on June 10th, just as I was learning about Prescott College through 3 recent guests on the show, Dr. Emily Affolter, Dr. Sebastian Grant, and Dr. Laird Christensen. Adding insult to injury for me was the simple fact that he was going to come back on this show this summer to talk about all things turtles so we could celebrate our turtle geekdom together. I planned to tell him then that he had inspired me to pursue my PhD in sustainability education at Prescott College. But even in his passing, our story was not yet done. As I met with Emily Affolter, who leads the PhD program at Prescott, to discuss the first courses that I would take, I asked to see the syllabus for one of the courses. It was called Sustainability Principles and Practices of Sustainability Education. It's taught by Dr. Scott Ramsey. And as I read over it, the first required textbook jumped off the page at me. It was this, Blue Mind. The surprising science that shows how being near, in, on, or underwater can make you happier, healthier, and better at what you do, by none other than Wallace J. Nichols. I started to tear up. I felt like he was in the room with me. Emily shared that Dr. Scott Ramsey, the very person teaching this course, was a collaborator of Jay's. And so it goes. Serendipity. So while my courses haven't yet started, I decided to invite Dr. Scott Ramsey to guest on my show so we could talk about this shared connection about his work and to honor Jay. And yet there's something more. I knew I wanted to have this conversation today, July 19th, 2024. That's when we're recording. At the time, I didn't know really why I felt like it should happen today. And in the process of prepping for today's conversation, I went back to Jay's LinkedIn page to look for something about the upcoming re-release of Blue Mind, which may now have been canceled given his death because I could not find the post. I learned at that time that today would have been Jay's 57th birthday. And so it goes, yet again, serendipity. I'm not a religious person, but I do believe that when you're on the right path, moments of meaning will line up to tell you that you're right where you're supposed to be. Okay, this has already gone on too long, and I may just start crying if I don't just do this now. So I'm going to bring Dr. Scott Ramsey up now so we could get this thing started. Dr. Scott Ramsey, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
A longer, perhaps, intro than I think I've ever done. But I wanted to first say, I wish you water. It's nice.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of choked up too. Jay was a dear friend of mine, mentor, and co-collaborator. It's funny. I was in my first semester in the doctoral program at Prescott. I went to Prescott for the sustainability education program as well, and we were in Austin for a sustainability conference there. And I was still kind of circling around. I've been a water person for decades. And I saw the blue marble on the side of the book. I picked up the book, looked at it, read the title, and put it on the counter and bought it without even opening it up, and just knew it. And it turned out you could also schedule meetings with the authors. He was giving a keynote, so I was able to connect with Jay, and then I was like, oh gosh, this is the guy. So it's wonderful to hear you're also a disciple.
Yeah. It's he sent me, and for our first interview, this book with a postcard and also a blue marble. And this looks like it was hand-stitched bag that was floral. And I knew it was a gift from him. It came from his address, right? And after I finished reading the book and had the interview, put this in the little free library down the street along with the marble to pay it forward in the spirit of the book, right? And after he passed, I was like, oh, I wish I still had that book, and I wish I still had that marble, and they're gone into the world, and that's what he would have wanted, but I went back to the little free library, and somebody had put the book back. The marble was gone, but the book was back, and it was a little more worn. And so now it has some coffee stains on the front, which I'm not sure you can see, but I'm not going to give it back up again. This one's mine. And apparently I'll need it for your course.
Fair enough. You'll need it, of course. I was really blessed that we were recently on the East Coast, and turned out Jay was giving a talk with Slyvia Earle. They were doing this kids, inspiring kids in oceanography and doing a Blue Mind thing. So he asked me and my 13-year-old daughter if we would go down and help pass out marbles. And so, we're passing out marbles and hanging out. And so Slyvia Earle gives her talk. It's really motivational. It's really inspiring. And the kids are just really into it. And right after it was over, right as it's ending, I could see Jay move across the stage, and I just knew what he was doing. And he went directly to my daughter and grabbed her and brought her up on stage and introduced her to Slyvia Earle. And then Jay had given Lily a marble to give to Slyvia. And so, there's this beautiful moment where Lily's given Slyvia Earle a marble, and then Slyvia reaches into her pocket and pulls out a marble and gives it back to Lily. So it's just this incredible moment that we were able to have just a few months ago.
So for those who don't know who Slyvia Earle is, why don't you share a word or two? And then perhaps we should also describe what this whole blue marble thing is about for those that haven't listened to that earlier episode.
Yeah. So Slyvia Earle, also known as her deepness,
That's right.
is just this in profound in a variety of different ways, not just for amplifying water and the importance of oceans, but also doing it, amplifying the feminist perspective, right? And being one of the first people to, dive deeper and do some research. She's voted the top, numerous science awards and is the NOAA's National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration's scientific ambassador. So she's her deepness.
Yeah.
And so the blue marble, she's been a colleague of Jay's for a long time. And the blue marble idea is that if you were to look at a marble and you were to hold up the blue marble from a distance, you would see that would be the same perspective you would have if you were standing on the moon. You would see a watery planet. And so the idea is that the marble would symbolize our watery planet, our connection to water. And so the idea is that you pass a marble on, showing respect and gratitude. That's a way to connect people, but also to realign with the wonders of water, it turns out.
Well, Scott, another thing I would just point to with Slyvia Earle, I believe she was also one of the scientists featured in the Netflix documentary Seaspiracy. So one of those individuals was interviewed about the health of our oceans and where we are now. She's one of the women that I think has been scuba diving longer than just about anybody else, perhaps save for Jean-Michel Cousteau, who I had the pleasure of interviewing and of seeing in person down at his 80th year of diving and discovery in Santa Barbara this last fall. So, are you a scuba diver?
I'm not, but I am a snorkeler, and I don't scuba dive, but I do snorkel. So I enjoy most aspects of water, but scuba's not my deal.
Well, I'd love to learn from you a little bit about how you have been inspired to bring in content like Blue Mind to the Sustainability Education PhD program, and perhaps give me a little preview into what that course is going to be like so that I learn a little bit about it and so that those listening who may be curious as well could have something to say about it.
Yeah. Okay. It's kind of, the course has multiple facets really. And the idea is that one of the ideas is that we oftentimes these are pretty potent times right now, and oftentimes we feel divided and alienated for a variety of different reasons. But there are these things like our shared connection to water that bring us together and create bridges. And so the science behind it is that when we're in, near, or on water, our physiology, our neurology changes, and our brain fires in the same places that it does when we're feeling compassionate. Incredibly powerful, right? And it's no coincidence that we pay more for oceanfront. The majority of the population lives by major rivers or oceans, and so there's this common thing, and whether or not we know it or not, there is an emotional value to water. And oftentimes when we talk about sustainability, it's moving now towards there's also a kind of a moralistic view, like we should be doing these things like this. There's oftentimes an ecological perspective. So just stay with the water theme. We may want to protect a river because of its ecological benefits, right? But there's also economic benefits to water, right? I mean, that's where transportation for a long time. That's where transportation routes were all about getting goods and services to places cheaper, and oftentimes those were on water routes. So the idea behind the course is to, one, bring in this emotional piece. This also is a cultural piece, and the other part is, so we want to build bridges instead of dividing. That we all share this planet, and we also share this neurological connection to water. And the other thing about the course is that oftentimes while we feel disconnected from each other, we're oftentimes disconnected from where our food, where our water, where our energy, where our transportation, where our waste goes. And So the idea behind the course is that you really, to take a personal, before you can go out broadly, before you can make broad sweeping changes, whether or not that's in your community or whether that's regional or globally, really need to take a deeper look at your own personal usage. So that's kind of the course. And so what we do is we start with water, and we look at how much water we use directly and indirectly. And so we keep a personal journal for water. So while we're learning about our regional water and global water issues, we're also finding more about purposefully looking at our own water usage. And then we do that for waste, and we do that for transportation, and we do that for energy, and ultimately do it for food. And what we start to see is that, there's been this kind of cultural amnesia that's happened, that we've forgotten that, strawberries are ripe in the summertime. We're just used to eating berries whenever and however. And so, and that's not either good or bad. It just is. And what the implications of having access to, strawberries or avocados year round, what that means. Oftentimes means that they're grown somewhere else, or they're grown in a way that's not regenerative. And so that has these broader implications. So it's really about like peeling off all those layers, and for us to really be critically reflective, and then to then kind of explore, how might my own community, with its own nuances, how might we be able to address some of these issues that's a little bit more sustainable, but also responsive and just.
Yeah. One of the things that it got me thinking about looking at the syllabus and things like videos that we'll be watching around watersheds and the importance of those arenas, it really caused me to think a little more deeply about the work I read with Paul Hawken's Regeneration, and how we need to champion certain apex species so that we can do things like restore wetlands. And in California, there are teams of people and environmentalists working to lobby for the beaver, for example, so that we can have, more clean, pristine water, like freshwater areas that come inland and that help to both bring nutrients to the soil and sequester carbon and provide these estuaries for all sorts of animals and wildlife, to ensure that we can have genetic diversity and species diversity within, the borders of our country, because we've gotten to a spot where we've essentially made it harder and harder for some of these wild species to exist. So I think there's some strong movements in that arena. There are some wildlife corridors being installed to help protect them from becoming roadkill. You try to cross the I-5 because you need to get to water, just for example, as a deer or a coyote. And it is like playing Frogger, a game that I loved to play in the 80s. But geez, how much roadkill you see, how we've cut off all these wild animals from the typical water sources that they might have during the drier months of the summer.
Yeah, it is wonderful to see there's more and more ecological literacy, to see these kind of systems approaches and see how you pull one thread in this tapestry, and the whole weaving comes apart.
Yeah, and it kind of breaks your heart. You spend time in Southern California and you see like people just spending all this resource to water lawns that aren't even used, just like decoration. Yeah. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and so, and what's interesting about that idea is, there's kind of this ecological place where you can talk about, from a systems perspective, how all these things are interconnected, and how, there's the importance of biodiversity for that, for all the reasons, right? And then there's also, but some people don't respond to ecological for whatever reasons. That's the scientific, that language doesn't resonate with people. We've talked a little bit about the moral idea. We often talk about environmental movements often are kind of centered on moral and philosophical. This is what we should do. This is our, all these kind of these moralistic frameworks. And some people resonate with that language, but then there's also a whole nother language that oftentimes conservation groups don't work in. Like we're good in ecological, we're good in moralistic, but oftentimes we don't work well in economics. And so for some, that's the language, right? So talking about not just the ecological importance of the beaver and how it connects all of the different things, but to also then say, okay, well, if you pull the beaver out, it's going to cost you more money because so we working in with Jay actually in Florida talking about the mangroves, and there's certainly this amazing ecological services that they serve by creating habitat for little fish and the variety of things. And so some people are on board with that, but there's this place where you're like, well, you're also saving millions of dollars because it's protecting against storms.
That's
and
right.
So that language
protects the coastline.
Right?
When you know that Florida is essentially going to be covered in water if all the ice caps melt too, there's a protective nature of having more greenery, and the fact that it helps to cool the climate. When the more greenery you have, the more trees.
So I think that's an important part about sustainability education, is that it's all of those arenas and being able to have multiple arrows in your quiver to be able to direct language and in a way to different groups, right? Because different groups, they're like, yeah, no, that's not, I don't resonate in the moral or the ecological, but they likely do for economics. So,
one of the questions I wanted to ask you, just kind of something that nags at me since interviewing Paul Hawken and many others over the course of the last 4 years. I have heard from many in this space that they don't even really like the term sustainability, because what are we working to sustain? And I wondered what your thought around that was, especially as you represent courses that are offered in sustainability. And Prescott College, even calls this degree sustainability education. A PhD in sustainability education is what I'm working for. What would you say to those naysayers from the dark green side of the aisle?
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Particularly when you think about, like you're saying, what are we sustaining and for who are we sustaining it? Are we continually to marginalize groups so that we can sustain privileges, systemic privileges? That doesn't seem to be the right word if that's what the goal is. I think it does serve a purpose, however, when you think about if you have two extremes, the wording of sustainability and the principles behind sustainability have certainly moved some of those peripheries towards the center, which has been helpful, right? So people just even think about sustainability where in the past they didn't. But I think as we've moved that way, like when we were kids, we didn't use the word sustainability, not in this way.
No, not in this way.
So it's kind of served its purpose, but now let's talk maybe about, regenerative resilience. Can we move past that? Can we move to like regeneration? Is there a resilience model? Is there a way in which we can do this in a more just way? That's more enduring, that's more responsive? So I think they're right on. It's like, okay, we're here now. But the center, that movement is still not counting for what we're sustaining, right?
Yeah.
So
you see, perhaps I see it a little bit differently, because I'm such a lover of language. And I thought for a long time when I was in high school and into college that was going to be what I would pursue, was a degree in literature. I wanted to really go far in that arena. My father wanted me to go in the sciences, which I was equally interested in, but I simply couldn't get through all the calculus. And so I chose anthropology and archaeology, right?
Calculus is the great barrier to ecology. And it's somehow, yeah.
Yeah, well, then I went and got my MBA and didn't realize I was in a super quant heavy program, so had to learn the calculus anyway. So it's just like, great, I had to sit there and take it now, but it was torture. How much of it do I retain? Not very much, because that's the way maths are for me. But, I can work through a problem if I have to with some support now. As it stands, I'm looking at the word sustainability. And I think words are what we make them. And the problem is that you have, every time something rises in popularity, the meaning of it will get co-opted. There will be those that want to benefit from the meaning of it as the groundswell becomes evident. And so regardless of the fact that sustainability may not mean to people within the dark green side of the spectrum what it once did, it still has that core. And so I think there's value in creating that groundswell and getting enough people really thinking and talking about something. And then when we have something like a term like regeneration come to the main stage and everyone starts focusing on the word regeneration, and then suddenly we just create a situation where, again, we're creating a groundswell, we're creating interest, we're creating this new category, which really has the same core meaning that sustainability used to have for us, but no, we mean this now. And so we'll end up in the same situation in probably 5 years where it no longer means what we want it to mean. And we're going to change it because this has been co-opted. And now you can buy regenerative beef, but we don't like that you're getting this from like farm animals. And so therefore the vegans on the other side are going to say no to regenerative. And this is not what you should be talking about. And you're the enemy of progress for the earth because eating beef is bad for the environment. I'm just painting a picture, right? And I already see some of this occurring in the fringes. So what I'd like to tell my audience, and the reason I still keep Care More, Be Better, social impact, sustainability, regeneration, sustainability, that word is in there because I will not villainize the perspective. I think there's still immense value in thinking about systems as something that can be sustained because we're nowhere near that yet. We aren't there. We aren't achieving that. And yes, I understand the concept of wanting to regenerate these systems and of drawing down carbon and cooling the environment as opposed to being stuck in this situation we're in now, which will mean weather will continue to get worse for 30 years no matter what we do until we start to get to a point where we're pulling down or not emitting more than we're emitting, that we're going to see worsening conditions. It's going to get real bad real quick. And I think most of those in the know understand that. However, it doesn't change the fact that we as a, let's just say, emboldened group, we're going to have to keep working just as hard. I don't want to create more enemies along the way, right? I want more people to champion sustainability. I want more people to champion concepts of regeneration, to think about circularity, to think about life cycle of the products that they bring into their homes and of the ways that they live. But I guess my whole point in bringing that up is, why do we have to sit here and like try and trash something that we worked so hard to create in the hearts and minds of the populace? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's funny. When you were talking, I thought about one of the beautiful things about Jay's work was he selflessly wanted the concept of blue mind, the groundswell. He wanted it just to be common knowledge that we have an emotional connection to water. That was his goal. There wasn't an economic driver for him. That's what it was. It was not copywriting. It wasn't like that. It was just, he just wanted more and more, it to just be common words. And, but I think you're right. I think when you get something like a concept like sustainability come to the forefront, it's how you interpret it. And certainly there's a lot of room we can go, but the word and what it represents has moved the needle, which is really, I think, is a really important thing. When I was going through school, it was calculus and physics that turned me out of the sciences, and I had to come back to it in grad school, into ecology and grad school. And there wasn't environmental science. There wasn't environmental studies. There wasn't a thing, environmental. I mean, you talked about environment, but then, so slowly like environmental became the word, right? Late 90s and then 2000s. And then that kind of just, and so your words have a lot of power, but at the same time, we're the ones giving it the power. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's done a lot of, we still have room to go in whatever you want to call the room that we need to go, and whatever word represents that wording. We do need to have a more responsive and more just way of thinking. So, but yeah, there you go. It's pretty exciting. I think often, Tim, in this conversation, we were talking about when listening to Slyvia Earle talk and talking about this, these are dynamic times and how she wouldn't change it for anything. Could we actually have a chance to make changes, reevaluating the way we think about business, the way we think about relations, and making these important connections. And that was really helpful. So I think there's this place of inspiration in there, even if we do need to reevaluate or continue to reevaluate, right? And I think the other element in this is really important is the idea about process. And I hope we don't ever come to the word, and the word is it. It's not a goal. The goal line hopefully is always going to continue to move, because it's about process, right? It's about not being like, nope, this is the answer. Like, this is
we're
the
done.
way
We're done. We can go home now, right?
Sorry, ongoing. That's the way it is. So in some ways, that's good. We'll reevaluate, continue to learn and unlearn.
Sorry, it froze for a minute. Okay. I was hoping that you could talk to me for a moment, Scott, about your work up in Alaska with the Alaska Outdoor Science School. This looks so intriguing to me. I have a son who's 9 years old and tells me constantly that he wants to go to Alaska to like study the outdoors in some way. Like this is his dream at this age already. He spends a lot of his time watching videos of people camping in extreme climates. And our niece, Ariana, lives up there and is an executive director for a company in Anchorage. So I'm hoping to come visit up there at some point in the next year or so. And perhaps finding out a little bit more about this school could motivate me to further do that.
Okay. Well, I think it's, I'll give you a little story before I get there. I graduated, a little bit about, we were talking about calculus and physics, and I went to school. My dad was a professor for a long time in sociology. And so he taught at a college for 42 years. I grew up on the college going to lectures and things like that. And so when it was time for me to go to school, that small liberal arts college in the East Coast was the obvious choice, but I couldn't go in. Science didn't resonate with me because of those barriers, and couldn't go into sociology. So I went into business. And in order to graduate with a liberal arts degree, you need to take what was called a January term. And you could do like photography or Japanese cooking or, whatever it was. And I took a Rocky Mountain ecology course and went to the Keystone Science School and was life-changing, blown away. Group shared purpose, experiential learning. We learned about tracking and indigenous people there, and we learned about ecology and all these different systems approaches, and just started to see this wonderful, incredible passion of like, oh my gosh, this has changed my life and changed my path. And so ultimately, I came up to Alaska to get some more field work after going on and getting a master's in environmental sociology. I was like, I want more field work. And so I came to Alaska and I thought, wow, I was guiding and I was like, this is amazing, but I have to go back. I'm going to go get my PhD. I want to make a difference. All these things, right? And so at the end of that first year guiding, this lady came to me from Chicago and said, I've never been hiking in the woods before, and I can see why we're trying to save these places. And so that was like, oh my goodness. So I had this desire to give that experience that I had, that kind of experiential learning model, that place-based experience, as well as recognize the profound potential for awe that you can get in a place like Alaska, and how awe reorients the way we see the world. And so that's kind of how the science school developed. And so the idea is we bring up students. Now we focused in the beginning, we focused on college students, but now we're going 8th grade all the way up through high schoolers and into grad school, actually. And it's multi-day experiential learning. They learn about kind of a systems approach, developing ecological literacy. So they learn about glaciers and then they walk on one. They learn about geology and then they, touch the rocks, all the different things. We learn about fish biology and we trap fish. We core trees. We do all these wonderful things. We go up to the native village and learn after kind of developing the ecological literacy. Then we go to the native village and we learn, wait a minute, there's this whole cultural importance to place. And so that's a really wonderful addition. And then we do an overnight on the river and we float on the river. And so there's this wonderful synthesis and people are seeing how all of these systems are connected, both ecologically and also socially. And and they get college credit for it. So it's just this amazing thing that I wish I had when I was in school. It would have changed my whole, who knows what the direction would have been. But I think that there's a lot of students, a lot of people out there that want that type of experience. And Alaska is just this amazing living classroom. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, speaking as somebody who thrives in that kind of a learning environment, I can say I would have loved it. I think that's part and parcel to the reason that I pursued archaeology so heavily, because I went on digs. I did digs in Central California and also in France. I learned to speak French fluently. I collaborated with the Centre des Recherches Archéologiques de l'Université à Paris 10, right? Like, how many people could follow that? Probably only the French speakers, right? But to be able to work alongside some giants in this space, like François Audu's, to be able to investigate sites that had, like, literally Saint-Césaire, Neanderthal remains, modern Homo sapiens, Neanderthal, modern Homo sapiens, Neanderthal, modern Homo sapiens. Like they literally shared this environment for, years and years. Their history overlaps by about 30,000 years. And so my early exploration and desire to become an archaeologist came from this fascination of what it would be like. Every other species on this planet has something that's a lot closer to them than between us and the apes, for the most part, right? Like how many species of fish are in the ocean? How many species of rodents do you see? And I was just fascinated by this and the possibility that our genetics could have been shared, or possibility that we might have communicated with language. And, now today we know from a genetics perspective that there is integration. I've tested. I'm like more Neanderthal than 35% of the population. Not a real surprise. I have European descent, right? But I think this all kind of comes together. And my reason for even enrolling as a PhD in sustainability education is because I see it as this incredible intersection between my early college, my understanding now of, how sustainability and nutrition fit together and what this can mean for our future. And also this real fundamental understanding that we need to actually move mountains. And in order to do that, we need to use the prowess of education. We need to use the power of understanding of messaging and how people can absorb the content that's put in front of them. I mean, we really have to think about almost creating our own brand of propaganda to get out into the marketplace for people to gain acceptance and grow this movement to build a future that can sustain life. And to me, that's at the core of what sustainability means, because if we don't do this now, then game over. And to get to that understanding and to see that so much of it is actually so closely connected to how we treat people around the globe. And that I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. And thank you, Dr. J. Wallace, for helping me get here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's beautiful. Yeah, well, back to the J idea, the notion of neuro-conservation, right? That are, what is it about? Are there ways in which our brain can relate to, environmental campaigns? Is there all these different, to bring that into the conversation? And I think, that was the work that Jay, validated all my love for water for sure, but also I started recognizing, oh my goodness, if we're going to promote advocacy, like you said, through education, through campaigns, through all this different, whatever that looks like to you, diversifying messaging, finding where it's about relationals, right? It's about creating relations, and that's all this heart, mind, the way our brain fires. We can't just we can no longer just like produce facts and be like, hey, that's how we're going to change the world. Here's more facts. We can't just say, hey, let's pour on the guilt. We're going to shame people into caring about the environment. Okay, let's use fear. The planet's going to burn up. And what we're learning is facts, fear, and shame don't really inspire.
No, they have to feel like they can take part in something. That's where I like what you're doing with this outdoor school, because, it's through being able to actually see the fruits of your physical labors that you ingrain learning in a different way and that you inspire people. So like you mentioned trapping a fish after learning about its anatomy. How few people actually go fishing now? I mean, I know that this is not rocket science for people, but like, I mean, I hear about inner city school kids that have never seen farm animals in person. And so, now it's like Miyoko Shinner, who I've interviewed on this podcast before. She's a vegan activist. She also is the creator behind Miyoko's Creamery. So she's scaled big businesses, right? She has now really put her efforts behind working farm that she has called Rancho Compasión. Consider it more of a retirement facility for any animals that come there, because they never end up on your plate, right? And what she's starting to do is actually bring people to the farm from those inner city spaces so that they can develop a direct connection and see how farming occurs and see, even how to grow food. They grow plants and they make plant-based recipes, and they connect with these animals and learn that they're not just brainless things that we should necessarily just go into a field and butcher without a thought. And I think her goal overall is to get people to think about food source. And I mean, this is one of the things, like, regardless of what your politics are around food, like, there are people who don't understand that beef and cow are directly connected. I mean, it's kind of astonishing, but it's true. And for children to not ever have had the opportunity to touch the wet nose of a cow, to me, is really sad. You know, I grew up in a small community in Southern Oregon, and, you know, I was always in connection with some sort of a working farm, either living with horses on my property or, you know, just having that connection. We raised rabbits and chickens for food. So I knew that life too. You know, it was a direct connection. Didn't mean we didn't care for them. We certainly did. But I don't know many people in my area that have ever plucked a chicken. You know, I have. So it's the importance of, I think, developing these connections and understanding how intrinsically tied we are as an ecosystem, that we're part of it, not separate from it. And while we can build structures and homes that protect us from the environment, there's really nothing to protect that outer world from the environment. And so we need to get back to really understanding that we're part of it and that we can take part of it, as opposed to just trying to live in a sterile environment, because that will never work either.
Yeah, no doubt. And you can, like you were talking about, this cultural amnesia, right? We've just a couple generations have lost that connection to our food.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. And we can give, you can give a slideshow with facts. You can tell them what they should, but it's really coming onto a farm, or, you know, holding the chicken, or going, you know, feeding the chicken, or whatever the experiential thing. It's those types of opportunities are needed more now than ever. And so that's, I think, what we're trying to do at the science school. And then also in terms of the Prescott, the sustainability education program, you know, it's online. So that doesn't feel, at first you're like, well, how is that possible? How can you do it online and be experiential? And so the idea is that we realize that we learn in community. Collectively, we learn in community. So we'll ask you to go, you know, whatever we're teaching. So like if I'm teaching a module on say waste, you're going to go to your landfill. You're going to go to, you know, so in that way it becomes personal, rather than, so everybody's doing their own thing in their own community. So they're taking whatever they're learning in the class, in the online space, and then directly applying it to whatever their community is. And so that's the way, what we call community-based experiential learning projects. That's how we try to make the online learning experiential, because, right, we can't all fly to Prescott or all fly to Alaska for these peak experiences. So how can we do it in a way that's more localized, and, you know, and develop a sense of place? So I think that's the place. That's a pretty exciting pedagogical approach.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm planning to go as a part of the PhD crew to Mexico in January to have some of those experiences in person. I still have to make sure my husband is okay with me being gone for a week. We do have 2 young boys, 6 and 9. So makes life a little interesting when one of us tries to travel.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, you know, circling back. I was going to say, circling back to Jay. Jay was pretty important in the Kino Bay. So when you go there, the whole Tortuga, the whole turtle advocacy campaign, that was all Jay going there and finding out that they had a shared purpose. And so it turns out now the very people that were hunting the turtles are now the people that are promoting advocacy of the turtles. So, you know, keep on circling back to, you know, how profound Jay's work was or is.
Well, I'll follow that through line, and I'll also get in the water while I'm there. I'd love to go scuba. Woo! So, you know, perhaps Scott, you'll join us too.
Yeah. I'm hoping to, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know you and to spend a moment's time in honor of Jay on this podcast, from a personal note as well. And I feel like I already have a jump start on the course, given that I have both listened to his audiobook and read this cover to cover a couple of times. But, you know, this is my life. So I feel like your course, and looking over at this first course that I'll be taking, This is the stuff I would do on my free time anyway.
Good.
So,
That's the right
I've
answer.
been to the landfills and I've seen the protected watersheds and I've, organized trail cleanups and all of that stuff. So this is just an extension of what I already do from an extracurricular perspective. So it feels really ratifying in a way to participate. And I just want to say I appreciate you and thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for your time. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And I'm excited to learn with you. So thanks again for your invitation.
Thank you. To find out more about Dr. Scott Ramsey and his work with Alaska Outdoor Science School and Prescott College, see our show notes. There, you'll also find a link to our expanded blog page, which includes the video version of this podcast episode, complete transcripts, links to prior episodes, and everything else that we discovered today. While you once found all of this on caremorebebetter.com, you'll now find it at circleb.co. This is because I'm shifting to that cause before commerce platform. The site hosts the same great content that you've seen on caremorebebetter.com, but you'll also now find how-to guides, DIY tools to renew what you have, replace things that you buy, and reduce waste, while also shopping for only eco-friendly products. CircleB.co will offer plastic-free products from housewares and clothing and personal care items, all of which are circular in design that minimize waste and that seek to limit or eliminate wastes. For each new subscriber, we are also collaborating with forestplanet.org to plant a tree. So once you subscribe, you'll receive alerts when we come out with new episodes, tools to live a little greener, and specialized promotions from time to time. And when you shop on CircleB.co, your purchase will also benefit the Earth through our commitment with 1% for the planet. This is me doubling down once again to make sure that I am living what I'm preaching and hopefully to help cover the costs of this show once again. Thank you, listeners, now and always, for being a part of this pod and this community, because together we really can do so much more. We can care more. We can be better. We can find our true paths and step into who we truly are meant to be. With that, I'm signing off as Jay would have. I wish you water.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.